I want to make some comments about the recent release of the book Imminent Inside the Pentagon's Hunt for UFOs by Luis Elizondo, which we've been waiting for quite a while. And I've had time to finish the book and read through it carefully. I think pretty carefully. At any rate, yeah, I think it's a book I'd highly recommend to anybody interested in the subject of the UAP phenomena. It's and the government policies and actions with respect to it, which I think, in a lot of ways, a lot of the material is in terms of the phenomena itself. I think that people have studied or won't be too surprised by what's in that book. But what is interesting, I think, is maybe the government aspects of it, what the government knows, and you know their attitudes toward it. It gives some input to knowledge in these areas. One thing I think is sort of interesting, and I found this and other events that have come out over the recent years, is the fact that it is claimed that there is what is often referred to as the program, or maybe the legacy program. I'm not sure why the term legacy exactly, I guess, but at any rate, that exists, that has been involved in the recovery of UFOs, crashes, and the remains of the crew of these vehicles, and the study thereof, has been highly rumored. Let's put it. It's generally assumed that this is going on now among I think, a lot of the UFO community. And I think that's years ago. I think it was much more controversial, but I think that this is apparently, for instance, Elizondo, from his position, pretty much confirms the Roswell crash, and even proposes a potential theory of why it happened. And apparently this seems to be largely based on input from Hal Puthoff, who's studied these kind of things for years. And so we don't know what the real basis of some of that information is, but it seems to be generally considered that likely to be the case that this really happened, that there are several other crashes are mentioned also in there. And so that's one of the aspects. What's also interesting to me about it, and he revealed this for the first time that I knew, that Chris Mellon, who's one of his big supporters and wrote the foreword to the book, and even in the position of being the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, apparently is unaware of the existence of the program itself and its activities. And we also know that, for instance, that Admiral Wilson, from the papers that were found in Edgar Mitchell's files, also was unaware of it until Dr. Greer, gave him some leads on it, which he then checked into, and actually ended up talking to one of the contractors involved in it, and was eventually denied access to the program, although was given kind of an overview of what he was not being given access to, and said, go on your way and have a good career. It could end two ways, with a promotion or a demotion. Which would you prefer? He took the promotion. So, but the fact that high-level people at this level are not actually cognizant of it presents one of the interesting facts. He also details in there how he ran into opposition, because essentially this book essentially is a narrative of his involvement, and it gets a little bit in his background and how he got into his job in intelligence, and in the DIA and so forth, and then eventually was brought in by Dr. Lukaski into the OSOP program, Advanced Aerospace Weapon System Application Program, which was again a kind of a fake name that was created to confuse any outsider as to what they were really doing. And And so, at any rate, he was brought in initially to be the security chief for that program. He was a GS-15 level intelligence officer, which is about as high as you go until you get into the senior executive service type grades and the political grades and so forth. So that he had a very fairly good management level position, I would say, in the Pentagon, and essentially what happened at some point is that they lost the funding due to various political battles and changes in leadership within the DIA. And then he was eventually confronted with another senior person who basically raised the fact that the UFO subject was demonic in nature, and therefore shouldn't be studying it, which is interesting. These people apparently were of a very I don't know, fundamentalist Christian sect, at least pretty intense apparently, at religious, and I would think the question would be, well, shouldn't you be opposing the devil and see what he's up to if they're demonic? But at any rate, apparently that this group apparently was one of the opponents they faced, and that and the lack of funding, he eventually became convinced that he would be better off leaving the DIA and going to the Office of Secretary of Defense, I think it was, and conduct activities there, and use the name ATIP acronym, which had been created. Well, he doesn't mention it here, but other sources know that it was created as an acronym for a potential special access program, which was never created. And so, anyhow, and under the ATIP rubric, he, from his position as a GS-15, was able to put together a group of people to investigate the subject from inside the military, Pentagon issues. And one reason why he can do this is because, any kind of an encounter with an unknown craft in military airspace or around a military base or any other similar thing is a reasonable security issue that the government would be interested in. And without, if you don't put the alien explanation around it, it's a quite legitimate thing. And so, from his position, he could carry out these studies. And he had a group of people around him. Jay Stratton is one of the key colleagues in this effort. He also was working with people like Hal Puthoff, who also had been involved with NIDS and the OSOP and so forth. So he has a long history in this. So you get the idea that was kind of the operation. And that's also, I think you get the idea there that was some of the confusion about, did he or did he not have this program? Essentially, it was handed off to him by Lukaski, as far as I can tell, and he simply took it up on his own authority, using the mission statements he was given, to pursue this subject. In other words, if he's there to look at various security threats, well, that it's a legitimate thing to investigate. And as long as the UFO was kept out of it, well, it worked out pretty good, right? And so, at any rate, that's kind of the way I see it as how he got into it and how he was able to conduct this effort. Another thing that's sort of interesting about this that's worth noting is that Elizondo seems to still, even at this date, see this subject largely from the point of view of a threat that needs to be countered. Looking at the idea that these objects do invade secure, restricted airspaces and bases, that therefore they need to be considered to be a threat and dealt with as such. And in fact, what only led to his resignation and his current public crusade over the last several years apparently really stems a lot from, as the way he describes it, from what happened with the USS Theodore Roosevelt strike group, with the various objects that they saw apparently on a fairly intense level over a period of time that were essentially infiltrating their training grounds, and apparently people were putting flight hazard reports in, which he picked up on, and apparently that plus the fact that he had a plan in which he was hoping to draw the UFOs out and I guess be able to monitor them with various sensor systems if they could draw them out by bringing a lot of nuclear assets, either nuclear propelled ships or maybe ships that were armed. Since they seem to be attracted to things nuclear, the idea was to get several of those in a concentrated area along with appropriate sensor systems, and therefore you could get some good observations of these objects. And he proposed this plan to the higher ups, and eventually it kind of fell by the wayside. They didn't pick up on it. I think that convinced him that a serious threat was being ignored, and only led to him taking the action which he did to leave to resign. Um, so anyway, I think that's an aspect that needs to be considered in his viewpoint. Uh, the idea that there's a mounting threat from them in the sense that it was like imminent, I don't know. I guess he felt it's imminent. That's why he titled the book that way. Although I'm still left with the idea, okay, but what are we going to do about it? I mean, if they really do turn hostile, it's unclear, you know, do we have any real possibility of actually mounting an actual defense? And also, it's unclear to me, of course, I think that it's much more likely, based on what we know about the subject, that infiltration may be more than overt conquest would be the approach that they would take if they do something threatening. In other words, but because but that kind of gets away. He does also discuss the issue of implants in the case where one was removed from a service member at a military hospital, and he comments on what they found, and the fact it apparently freaked out the doctor when it tried to evade being removed, I guess. So I mean, so he's into those kind of things as well in the book and mentions them, and I think this provides confirmation for many things we know about that his aspect of a government program was fully aware of this. Now, what the actual program, the legacy programs it's called, I guess, what they know, I presume they go way back to, you know, the very beginning, at least to Roswell, or maybe even before, but certainly to Roswell and after. And I think that they probably have accumulated a lot of knowledge about these subjects. And you know, it may well be that what you've got going on here is the fact that it's interesting that he had his own kind of off the books program, ATIP, but the legacy program is also a big off the books kind of program too, in a way, which is interesting. But now that Congress is involved in it, and I guess the difference is also that his was funded about things that were, well, legitimately in the purview of investigating various, you know, incursions into airspace and military bases and that sort of thing. The legacy program presumably has been funding much more elaborate things and have not been revealed to Congress. Although it is an interesting debate about, you know, I've never been totally convinced that the program itself is in fact illegal, although it might have become illegal as new laws were passed that maybe weren't adopted by the program. You know, in other words, but I guess that would be if it actually gets to a showdown with Congress and them. I guess that'll be something for the courts to decide, or the Justice Department, whether they're going to file any legal charges or not for what was done. I mean, or will there be lawsuits of companies that didn't get artifacts to study, suing because they were cut out of potential items. My guess is, personally, that's just me, not from the book, is that I find the whole idea that we've actually had successful reverse engineering is kind of unlikely, because I see no evidence it's actually occurred. I suspect the better way of looking at it would be investigation and study. I think that these things have been studied in various ways, probably, you know, looking into the biology of the biologics, as they say. Do they have DNA? If they do have DNA, is it compatible with what's on Earth, or is it something completely different? Or do they even have that sort of thing? You know, the materials, what are they made of? Are there isotopic variances from Earth normal materials or not? All these kind of things. I think these are things that might well have been studied, but hmm, the idea that we're actually making our own and flying them, I find rather unlikely, just because of the obvious technological gap that would have to exist. Assuming all this is true, which I tend to, but we're still. It would be interesting to understand if it's not true, how everybody has been so thrown off track, including members of Congress, Elizondo and his team, and who knows who else, and other people who say don't look at this because it's demonic. Even they believe it's real. They just don't think we should be messing with it. So, at any rate, that's kind of the kind of areas the book gets into. It's an interesting personal story about the sacrifices he's had to make personally to bring this to light and so forth. So, at any rate, I'll kind of wrap this up for now. But I think it's a book well worth reading for anybody that's interested in the UAP subject, and particularly get some insights into the government and how they deal with it or fail to. So that'll be all for this time.